All right, here is the first lesson of the Reconstruction, the second part of Unit 1, Causes, Consequences, and Course of the Civil War and Reconstruction. You're looking at analyzing the different proposals made for reconstructing the South and conflicts among them. And it's also important to take note of a particular president here and exactly what it is about his background, he as a source, as a context, and the time period, his southern roots is a key here in influencing the treatment of African Americans and the impact on the Reconstruction. Very important topic here. That's your left-hand side. We'll chart it out in class here before your videocast homework assignment. One thing you might be able to do is make a foldable that compares and contrasts these three Reconstruction plans that we'll be talking about and reviewing here today. And that could go on your left-hand side. We know that the Reconstruction starts off on a pretty positive note. It's the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865 that bans slavery and gets it gone for the foreseeable future forever to the present day. It's gone, and that's a good thing. However, we do have a scenario where we have a significant number of people who are free. 4 million persons have just been freed on the condition of dependence. Dependent. These are people who, through no fault of their own, have no knowledge of business and do not even have the simplest elements of education. Few of them are mechanics and none of them are skilled manufacturers. They must necessarily then become the servants and victims of others likely Southerners or other whites, wherever they may be, unless they are in some way made independent of their neighbors. Should we keep them in a position where they have neither skills nor property, then it seems probable that their condition will become so desperate that the war of the races many fear may well take place. However, by giving them land and money with which to build a dwelling, we will make them independent of their old masters. This is going to be a pretty radical idea discussed in 1867, 2 years after Lincoln's assassination, 1865, and the passage of the 13th Amendment. A radical view, we'll be talking about that radical view coming up and what that involves. It is a proposal to give away land for free, and how they justify that. So the Reconstruction debate is one that is a physical reconstruction. How is it physically going to be rebuilt in the South? Most of the fighting is in the South. Questions are, how do those states come back in? What kind of conditions they come back in under, a checklist of things they have to do, rebuilding the economy and the society of the South. What does it look like? Should we remake the South in the form of what the North is like economically and socially? There's going to be political conflict and violence here for the next 20 years over those questions, the position of freedmen, freed slaves, politically, what is their other true rights? The 13th Amendment and banning the institution of slavery brings that question up. You know, how do they really fit in this society now that they are free? Free at what level? This map kind of shows the devastation and degree and severity and intensity of battles in each of the hemispheres of the war, and most of the destruction, death, dying again, is in the South. There are two competing plans right away. The first one is Lincoln's plan. He is going to come with the mindset that punishing the South serves no purpose. The only only thing will come from that is delaying a healing a torn up nation. However, there are radical Republicans who feel that the South must be punished and must be socially and economically transformed. But Lincoln's plan was known as the 10% plan. He announces it on December 1863, and he said that when there is 10% of the voters in each southern state that are going to be willing to swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution and to the Union and will never take up arms again, then that state can set up a new government. They'll set up a new constitution, have their little constitutional convention, the best and the brightest there, and they can redraw a constitution that was going to also ban and adopt the 13th Amendment, ban slavery and adopt the 13th Amendment. Then Congress can approve them and bring that back in. Plus, there would be amnesty or a pardon to all Southerners except Confederate leaders, the top Confederate leaders. And that was a big issue. What happens to these people? Do they go on trial for war crimes, treason, whatever? Hard to say. It was a big issue and a big problem. And the Reconstruction was actually going on while the war was still going on. Lincoln was actually trying to set up states under military control. Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee had Lincoln government set up under them. The military basically ran them. And some radical Republicans who were in charge of Congress, becoming more powerful in Congress, like Thaddeus Stevens here to the right, strong abolitionists, said that everything in the South has to be broken up and relayed, otherwise everything that's going on here and has been lost in this war is in complete vain. And they've threatened that if these states come in too easy without having been remade, they will deny the seats for those representatives when they come back into Congress with new representation. And it is the process yet today that when new representatives come in, they are voted in as being legitimate representatives by the ones that are sitting in already in Congress. So the radicals, the radical Republicans, come up with a proposal, and that is a counter-proposal to Lincoln's plan. It's called the Wade-Davis Bill. And they said that when a majority, they couldn't understand how 10% would be enough. There has to be more than half of the people who rebelled in that war. When a majority of the state's white males swore an loyalty oath to the Union, then they could come back to the Union. Then states would be able to have set up constitutional conventions that would be held, and only Southerners who swore they didn't fight or rebel can participate. So they're trying to exclude, big point here with the radicals, they want to exclude the bad boys and girls here and the leadership of the rebellion so that there's new people. Old people will just produce old ideas and old problems. And the 13th Amendment is something that they had similar in mind. The Constitution must ban slavery, and they must adopt that. But former Confederates are not allowed in public office. They felt there had to be some punishment, some retribution for what went on here. They can't just come back in and hold the same old positions because it's going to result in the same old issues. Freedmen, on the other hand, would have complete, full political equality. The bill comes to Lincoln's desk. He refuses to sign it. It's too radical, too harsh. It's going to cause too much difficulty in bringing the Union back together. He lets it die through a pocket veto. He wants everything formed back together quickly and painlessly as much as possible. Again, one of the key aspects of the Wade-Thomas, that's a typo, Davis bill is that former Confederates could not hold public office. All right, March 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau is a proposal that is established from Congress. This is the very first federal institution and federal government agency that ever gives direct assistance to anyone in American history. You might say this might be the beginning of an example of welfare in a sense. But they're passing this law through Congress called the Freedmen's Bureau, and Lincoln will sign it, that is going to help illiterate, impoverished freedmen adjust to freedom. It'll also help some whites in the South as well, but it's meant to provide food, clothing, medical attention, land possibly free land. That's going to be an idea that will be kicked around and it'll be tried, but it's actually going to go away and not really happen. But have some agents also out there like this individual here, an agent from the Freedmen's Bureau to represent workers in their conflicts that they're undoubtedly going to have with Southern whites and white landowners so that they're treated fairly. These people need a lot of help. The biggest success, super big star, and most important glaring, long-lasting impact of the Freedmen's Bureau is that it sets up a litany of, to this day, schools and educational institutions to bring literacy to freedmen. And you'll notice here, and if you look at other pictures here, these are one-room schoolhouses, often by white teachers, some of them from the North who have a feeling of wanting to help out and rebuild the South and bring literacy there. And they're of all kinds of different age groups, but there's going to be a number of new American colleges that are going to develop out of this, such as Atlanta University, Howard, and Fisk. But there's going to be schools and colleges that, from this time period, dot and spring up all over the South. As you can see here, black colleges during the Reconstruction era, and some black colleges that were established in the North before the Civil War. After the Civil War, it just transfers down here afterward. But you can see where the Freedmen's Bureau were operating at, and where it was not operating at, it wasn't operating in some places. So this is the most long-lasting impact of this. A very important topic to remember. Lincoln is assassinated in 1865, and Johnson comes into office, assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Johnson was Lincoln's vice president in his second term in office. He was chosen because he was from the state of Tennessee. He was the only senator, very important thing to remember, that did not secede from the Union. Thus, Lincoln chose him to try and get some of the border states in that election. Tennessee, very nearby, and neighboring Kentucky. And of course, this all happens in Washington, D.C. itself, at the famous theater, Ford's Theater. Booth is caught in a big manhunt later on and shot and killed. But there's this big conspiracy, and this throws immense amounts of gasoline on the fire, especially for the radical Republicans, because they were Southerners who plotted this whole thing. that these Southerners have to pay, and they have to pay dearly. So Mr. Johnson comes into the presidency. He was a slave owner, didn't like the aristocracy, the high-class people in Southern society, felt they kind of cheated and pulled a fast one over the common people and to encourage them to secede from the Union. He was strong in states' rights views, champion of the common man, came from poor roots. Again, it's important to note he was a slave owner, but he was more Union than any of those other things. And so thus Lincoln chooses him. But his plan is the Restoration Plan. And notice the term restore. If you're restoring a 1957 Chevy, you're probably not going to turn it into a pimp my ride kind of a car. You're going to put it back to its original factory kind of a look, most likely. And when Congress was not in session, everybody's at their homes and visiting their constituents and their families and communities back home. Johnson was basically in charge of the entire Reconstruction. And he said, my restoration will involve if somebody swears loyalty to the Union, then they will be pardoned for anything they did in the war, and that would be including high-ranking Confederates, but they must come directly to me so that I can kind of humiliate them, but they can basically be pardoned also. But he opposes equal rights for freedmen, and as a former slave owner, you would expect that. How does that fit with radical Republicans? It doesn't. Cats and dogs, oil and water. Big problems here when Congress comes back in the session. And this little quote here, I would write it down, white men alone must manage the South, is his mindset, direct from his words. So state constitutional conventions would happen with only loyal and pardoned whites. Again, this could be whites who actually fought and led the rebellion, and they can vote for delegates. To the radicals, this was too easy. This was rewarding bad behavior. States must denounce secession in their constitutions and ratify the 13th Amendment and abolish slavery. By the time we get to the end of 1865, in the first few months of his position as president, almost every single state was ready to come back into the Union under those conditions, except Texas, and the radicals were having no part of it. They were not interested in that at all, and he is saying we need to bring all 36 or 25, we need to have all 36, Mr. Johnson. In this point of view. So the radical Republicans, when they come back into Congress, they're going to be very upset, and they're going to be basically powerless until Congress comes back into session. And Johnson, when he comes into is a little conflict here with Congress back in session. He's going to veto all their plans. He's going to anger them, so much so that they're going to override all of his vetoes, and that'll turn into a radical Reconstruction. So there's your three competing views on the war, on the Reconstruction. A little summary review of what you could do for some left side. Be ready to come in and review that, and as soon as you walk into class, have a good day. That's the way it is.